I think that brands really need to be much more focused on experience and making experience really good, because I did see another nerdy stat that word of mouth is by and large number one for how to get a message out. It was something like 5% of conversations happen on social media because people talk to each other. We tend to think that all these conversations are only happening online, only happening on social, when the vast majority are still people to people.
This is You Should Talk To, a podcast for busy marketing leaders who are looking for support and tips on getting shit done. In each episode, Daniel Weiner interviews marketing leaders and discusses their experience, successes, and failures around hiring agencies. If you're interested in finding and choosing the right agency partner, then let's jump in.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the You Should Talk To podcast. I am Daniel Weiner, your host and sponsor. Since no sponsors have ponied up the big bucks yet, maybe after today, You Should Talk To pairs brands and marketers for free with vetted agencies and or freelancers, because finding great agencies is an enormous pain in the ass. Super excited to be joined today by Casey Terrell, who is the CMO at Krystal. Casey, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
It looks like a little bit of you're in the office today for a change. I think last time we talked, you were at home. So welcome to some level of normalcy.
Yeah, it's nice. It's one of those, not great commute today in Atlanta, because if it rains here, then the world ends. So it took a little bit longer. It's funny, my children this morning have a 5 and a 2-year-old, and they decided they just weren't going to put their clothes on to go to school. So
got to do that. That's one of the things you learn early. You got to put clothes on to participate in society, you know?
It was almost a work from home day, because it would have been like, you know what? What's the point?
Well, let's dive. We can get back to the nudity part later in the podcast, but we'll dive into the marketing stuff right away. What is an unpopular opinion you have in the marketing world, or a hot take of sorts?
Oh man, I've got a hot take. I can go into the third-party cookies thing, which I think we should talk about later, because I have a whole passionate diatribe on that. But I would say my unpopular thing is that we're replaceable, and we probably will be replaced in the next 50 years with machine learning AI. And that's not something I think that marketers...
Fun. Let's enjoy it while we can.
Exactly. That's it. I think it's, we've seen the stuff with like ChatGPT and some of the things that came out recently that it's able to take the humanities and like natural language processors and all of these things, and you can, I put into it, give me a Krystal marketing plan for 2023, and it gave me a really good one. And I was like, uh-oh. But
you're not supposed to. Do you want me to cut this part out when I post this? Or
I'm extremely valuable. No, but I think it's not there yet, right? But I think that this idea that, that was in Sapiens, the book Sapiens, and I think it's, some of that stuff's been rebuked a little bit. But I still think this idea that we're moving towards a singularity with machine learning AI, that it isn't like the old, oh, well, when the car came out, then all the buggy whip manufacturers, they didn't have a job anymore. And they just, it's okay because they just moved into the new automobile industry. Yeah, but the car couldn't build and learn itself. Like, this is something completely new where, maybe it'll be fine. And the old adage of like new technology just begets new industries and begets new jobs and things that we don't know about. But the idea that an algorithm can learn, update itself, and get better and really get to some type of actual intelligence, you start to look at those industries where you need a lot of kind of that formulaic. I'll give you a good example of media, right? So you know the media world very well. If I'm trying to talk to you, Danny, at a certain time with a certain message on a certain channel, that's an algorithm. And we've already got that with programmatic and even direct and some other things in the media world. You won't need a human, because they don't really need humans right now other than to set some of the strategy. But that's just a taste, I think, of what machine learning AI and some of these other things will be able to do in marketing. Now that there's this ability to write copy, to come up with creative ideas. There's some of the stuff that you talked about in Sapiens about, the great American novel and movie scripts in the next 20, 25 years, you could have a machine do. Some of this stuff, I think, for marketers are, where do we go in the next 25 to 50 years? You're always going to need that human element, the human touch, for sure. Maybe.
A super uplifting start to this podcast.
That's my
Casey.
hot
We're
take.
all going to be fired tomorrow. No, I think it's definitely interesting. I guess my only thing that I think of is if everybody does it end up not working as well from a marketing standpoint, and the human element puts you 1% ahead of the AI? And I don't know the answer to that question yet.
Yeah, I
truthfully.
mean, it's funny. It's like, I think something that's analogous is like having machines and kiosks in a restaurant or a retail store, right? Eventually, I think there is backlash and people say, I just want to talk to a human being. And then that becomes a competitive advantage. And it's about having a little bit more personal interaction, because if everybody just has a bot and a kiosk,
Sure.
then the Neiman Marcus approach, where they're not paid commissions or anything, I was like, I'm just here to help you. That becomes very valuable, and maybe it just shifts around. I mean, who knows?
Yeah, no, that's definitely interesting. As it pertains to food and restaurant, you've worked in food a lot. Tell us a little bit about that journey and what you've learned along the way, landing you ultimately at the mountaintop of marketing roles here at Krystal.
That's right. I'm looking down from the heights of Olympus.
From a perch, yeah.
Right. Yeah, so I started after business school in 2011. And so 3G Capital had just bought Burger King. There was about 4 or 5 of us that went from my business school program. They had really cut everybody loose that was existing. There were some people that stayed that had been kind of legacy at Burger King. But man, that was a crazy, crazy time. I learned a ton. I ended up working for 3G again. I worked at Anheuser-Busch, AB InBev. But, we were like negative 200 or 300 million EBITDA or something when all of us first got in the building, and none of us knew anything, right? We had to just kind of start. That was an advantage, I would say, for the 3G model of, hey, we're going to hire a bunch of young, motivated people. If they don't figure it out, we'll just bring them in with new, motivated people, and it constantly turns over and we'll get better. It could be a little heartless, but at the same time, I do appreciate a lot of the stuff that they brought with data, really focusing on like guest experience and operations. And so that was my first foray really into food and bev. I'd always just been a customer before that. Learned a ton. Ended up following a mentor of mine, Patty Trevino, who's now CMO at Red Lobster, who's an absolutely fantastic person. Went to Outback with her after Burger King. And they've just kind of been in food and bev and just found that niche. But, when I first started BK, digital really wasn't a big part of our spend. Sure, there was apps, there was social media, all that stuff was out. But that inflection point where digital had taken over kind of linear and broadcast, we were nowhere near that. It was coming. Paid social was kind of in its infancy. So it was really cool to learn kind of traditional media, traditional marketing, brand activation field, all that stuff. And then as the years went by, see digital overtake it and start to see a lot of the like data-driven decisions, the stuff that 3G had pioneered a little bit more in the food and bev side, just become ubiquitous, right? Just like mainstream. And so I'd say food and bev over that time has really caught up a lot and has gotten more into that tech personalization side, but it still has some ways to go. It's not anywhere near like hotels and hospitality or Delta Airlines or any of that, but it's getting there.
How do you think, to that end, Krystal, as well as your friendly competitors in the space and other food and restaurant brands, win in 2023 when there's you just described 20 million things a CMO has to deal with, especially at a company your size with that many restaurants, field, paid social, paid search, the tactical stuff. How do you think you win in 2023 if you're giving somebody advice?
Yeah, I think our battle cry here is about relevance, right? Like relevancy within brands. So you still have to have brand marketing, storytelling. What are you guys all about? I mean, Krystal is a 90-year-old brand. Our owner, Jonathan Childs and Morgan McClure is at Fortress. That is one of the main reasons I came over, is because they very strongly believe in that, awareness, consideration, trial, that typical brand funnel, yes. But if you're not culturally relevant, so I guess that fits in more of the consideration side, but really the cultural relevance, if you don't have that, there's too much competition. There's too much going on, right? You have to be not only in a competitive set, but, we were talking with a candidate for social media the other day, and he was like, man, Krystal's kind of cool now with social and a lot of the stuff we're doing with 2 Chainz and Ray J and Vic Cruz and all these guys. So that's been a lot of how we separate ourselves, is getting more into the cultural side. I mean, Taco Bell did a really good job with this. The brands have done a good job. And then on the tech side, we're trying to build out a really good working tech stack with a CDP where it all comes in, where I know whether you bought in store, you bought online, don't care. I see everything together. I can really personalize a digital experience for you. We have a drive-through, right? I mean, QSRs with drive-throughs. it's the vast majority of your business. Getting somebody to order through an app and then sit in a drive-through like Starbucks, it's kind of gotten people to do. Still pretty hard. That's not going to overtake the experience. But if I do have any type of data, how can I, tailor promotions to you, tailor products to you? I've said this a lot. We're a focus that with loyalty, especially, we just spam people, right? Like here's a free cookie,
Sure.
Here's an email, send it out to the list, unleash the dogs of war. Now it's more, I know exactly what Danny likes. I know when you came in. I know that you don't really care about a BOGO, you care about points, or you care about a free cookie or whatever it is. That's, I think, where brands are starting to separate themselves in the food space, being hyper personalized.
I would be the free cookie guy for sure.
Yeah. I never understood the people that didn't go for it. I was like, come on, man.
I'm curious to that point, like from what I see when I talk to brands, of your size and stature, as well as smaller and bigger as well. Like you mentioned, you're making these data-driven decisions, but you also have to be culturally relevant, which when I think of that, I think of things like TikTok. How, I guess, for or against you are, like, what's your, I guess, risk tolerance for doing things that the data doesn't necessarily point to? Like, I would argue you probably have so much, but like, there are just some cool ideas or things you probably want to try that may or may not work, or you may not be able to track for a brand like you all, which I presume has a playground, or it makes sense for you to try quote unquote cool things. Like, what's your tolerance for stuff like that? And how do you think through that if you're not able to measure it?
Yeah, I'm going to go back on what I said before about machine learning AI taking over the world. I think that is still...
You just let somebody else, you just put it in ChatGPT and you ask if it's going to work.
Right. So that's why I still think there is going to be human touch. Do you have a massive marketing team anymore? That remains to be seen. But I still think there's going to have to have some type of that touch there of the data is blinking and saying this, but is that really what we think people want? There's still a bit of the art to it, right? So I think there are some of the things that we did a side chick promo with our chicken sandwich, where we saw a lot of the data, saw the CAGRs that were growing with chicken and everything else. It's growing faster than burger. We know we need to be more in the chicken space. I think you'll see Burger King, we were trying to do that forever, but it's hard when your name is Burger King. But I think it's a little bit easier for us to be nimble here. But very real world example of, should we do this? And the whole side chick thing was, we're late to the chicken game. We know that everybody's got their fave. Popeyes had this big cultural moment, right? And a lot of word of mouth. But how do we break through the cheesy marketer way? And so we thought, well, let's not try to compete and be the main. We're not going to be the main chick, but on Sunday when Chick-fil-A's closed, we'll come be your side chick, come cheat on Chick-fil-A with us. So it was a fun way to do this. And I don't know if there was any data really out there other than when we launched and had social listening and could see the sentiment analysis, then we really knew, hey, we got a winner here. That was something that 2 Chainz came up with. That was a cultural thing. So you still need that art of it. We think this is going to resonate. It can't 100% be based on data, because I think at that point, nobody takes any risks and nobody does anything that's interesting.
Yeah, I agree. That's a perfect example of that as well. I know you execute and use a number of agencies at Krystal. Overall, Krystal and beyond in your marketing career in general, what's your overall opinion of agencies? Love them, big proponent of them, hate them, a necessary thing in your world?
Yeah, I think it depends on a lot of it is the scale, because it's a cheesy thing to say again, but agency partners really should be partners. They should be extensions, right? Like they should really be part of your team. I hate it when agencies pitch and say, you should do this. They should, it's I consider you part of the team, right? But then also, on the brand side, we won't share sales and traffic data with them, or how things are going as far as the business goes. So if I'm pushing on, Caitlin as director of marketing of my team, she should have the same information if she's going to plan media with our agency. They should be working from the same, amount of data set. So that's a big thing for me, is just having them really as an extension of the team. But there are some things moving forward, it really depends, I think, on the talent that you've got on your side and what you want them to do. Because, hey, business is exercise in scarcity, right? So where can I take my resources here, get the best return, and then what should I farm out, that kind of thing. So on the tech side, you see it all the time. Do you buy, build, or partner? If you buy, then you're going with a white label solution, or something like that, and you were beholden to their tech roadmap, right? Like if I want to come up with some new gamification or something for an app, unless I built that, then I have to rely on that vendor to go build it, right? Or I just go buy the solution, try to implement it. The partner's a little bit of the same, so if you go with like a Punch or Cheetah or whoever. But if I build it, that's a huge infrastructure. There's a lot of platforms at InBev, we would just build on top of platforms, which I think is a good way to go. But again, it's the same thing in the agency model. Am I going to want to go out and buy media? I don't think that makes a lot of sense, because even with my media spend, if I could go to an OMD or somebody in Y&R or whoever who's going to go bring $1 billion to market, I know I'm going to get a better buys, better efficiency, better added value, all of those things, right? Creative, on the other hand, again, it just kind of depends on how you deploy the marketing team. If we're just tech oriented, if we're guest experience oriented, I think we're trying to find a good mix here. So we have an internal creative director, Jax, who's incredible, and partners with the agency to come up with big ideas, concept, and then bring them to life. So, I think it just depends on the brands that you're at. I was talking with a friend at Chipotle, and they do a lot of stuff themselves. Is that a better way to go? Or if you're a multi-billion-dollar brand and you've got bigger spends and you have more people, you still need to drive a lot of sales and traffic to a lot of restaurants. So what makes the most sense? Should you, I think it's very situational.
Are you getting hit up basically every single day, 1 million times a day by agencies and vendors? I find typically once you reach CMO, and also just having a brand with name recognition all day, every day from folks I chat with, is that similar to your experience?
Yeah, it is. It's a lot of sales folks and a lot of folks that I've worked with in the past, especially vendors and some other things that, you have a relationship, you know what they can do, and you want to bring them in over here, but, maybe the tech stack is there's already decisions that were made, or, contracts were signed and all these things. So a lot of the advantages, and working with a group right now, I'd love to bring them in tomorrow, but I've got a partner, for what they do. So they're trying to come up with creative ways to, do we test? Do they buy the contract? There's all kinds of stuff. But I'd say the agency side, for sure, I would love to give every agency a shot that comes in. Give them project scope, see what you guys can do. That's just not reality. Like, you just don't have that much time in your day, and you have to dance with the partner you brought, And then it's one of those things where you'll know, I think, right away. Dan, you've been in this world forever, right? Like, whether they're the right agency partner pretty quickly. And then unfortunately, you start thinking about RFPs, and it's a massive process. And obviously, to give you a plug, using a partner like you is a bit of an easy button, because look, we've both been around. I've got a lot of friends in this industry too. And I've got a text thread with a bunch of ex-Bloomin' folks, that we'll just text, hey, anybody got an agency for this? What do you think about this guy? That's very similar to kind of your expertise.
Need to figure out how to hack that text thread now. Find some ChatGPT AI to get in that thing.
Exactly. But it's funny because you end up doing the same thing and just asking for recommendations. But I don't know every agency under the sun. And there's folks that I would love to meet that I've never met, and maybe they would do a better job, maybe not, but at least knowing who's out there.
No, it makes sense. There are, I would say in general, folks with your role I talk to have a lot less willingness, truthfully. They're not looking to take new calls or unless the need is there, truthfully, which is good or bad depending on, I guess, the role that you're in. But no, I appreciate the free plug as well.
Look, I like ideas. I like new ways of looking at the world. Like, if somebody has something new, and we have a coordinator, Maggie, on our team, and she came up with something brilliant the other day. I was like, let's go, let's do it. Let's at least try it. That can be a bad thing when you have vendors and sales folks calling all the time, because you do see the value, but at the same time, you got to weed them out.
In general, what are you looking for from a partner? Whether you're looking for an actual partner to sign an agreement with, or just in general, what are you looking for from a vendor or an agency?
Yeah, I think somebody that really sees themselves as an extension of our team, that they understand that we're trying to drive traffic and sales. Like, look, we're a franchise system. Our franchise, our FDDs are publicly available. You can see what our system sales are, what's in our contract, and get to an ad fund. Be like, oh, these guys have this much money. We kind of back into it and understand what the opportunity is here. That said, that is the franchisee's money and our corporate partners' money. We are the stewards of it. We have to make sure we get a return on all of that. So having partners that understand franchise and franchisees, there's a good niche for a lot of agency partners in that. They are not a one-to-one. You can't just say, hey, we did creative, media buying for a massive B2B. That is not franchise world, man. there's small things that are in there that, that to me is the first layer, or at least having somebody that's worked in that and understanding. And the other side is hyper localization, right? Like, how do you we're a regional brand, we have national aspirations, but does it make sense for us to go with somebody who's massive, an Omnicom group or something that really can do national and do a lot of national buzz, but that's not helping my guy in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Sure.
So the long story short, it is a little bit more about the personalization of our brand.
And you made some shifts at the beginning, like towards the beginning of your tenure at Krystal. During that process, what ultimately led you? Like, is there anything you can think of that stands out about, what made you lean towards whoever you ended up picking, and, moving dollars away from folks that you're not working with and reallocating and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, we outsourced a lot. We had outsourced analytics, and we have an amazing analytics partner she's brilliant, but she always knew that, look, this is something that needs to be in-house. So I was able to recruit and bring over somebody I worked with in the past who's incredible, Mercy Grace. So that was kind of an easy decision. The media side was a little bit harder, but at the same time, there were just certain things in the analytics side. So I'd used other partners in the past that had pretty incredible dashboards with tagging, attribution, all of these things within Google Analytics, all of this stuff kind of together. And so not seeing that day one, that was a bit of a red flag, I would say. But look, they're a great shop, great partner, but it just isn't the level of detail and some of the things I wanted to see and that I wanted to train my team to look for and just to expect, right? Especially tagging and just understanding how a campaign worked, from that side. TV and radio and some of these other ones are a little bit more difficult, but some of the basic blocking and tackling stuff is just in an RFP we're looking for. It's just analytics have just become such a bigger part of agency partners in agency life. Even stuff with like using Kantar to test creative. This is stuff I was doing at Old Shop. Alex Brown and I at Focus kind of had a panic moment when we were doing a Cinnabon spot on the Schlotzsky's brand a year or two ago. But he was able to take that Kantar data and understand, hey, this is how it's resonating. This is how it's not. We didn't have time to do edits, but at the same time, we knew what we had from a creative standpoint. We knew what the strengths were. So then we could build some other assets around that. So again, not to go back to data, but you're flying blind if you don't have analytics or something coming in telling you a story.
Sure. Totally agree. You've mentioned RFP a couple times. I'm curious, are you in general, I presume at a brand like yours, you kind of sort of have to go through an RFP process. Do you like that? I find in general, like it's a very cold process, hard to like really learn the true colors of an agency. It puts them in a box a little bit. I'm just curious your opinion of that process in general.
Yeah, I mean, not to give you another plug, but I think that
I'm going to clip this whole thing. This is great.
Just a massive testimonial. Yeah. That's the funny part with my text group or having other friends in the industry. And, I was talking with somebody the other day and he reached out cold, we're friend of a friend. And it was, what are they like? What's their culture like? Not even culture, but like, how do you guys work well together? It's much more on the human side. Because you can look at agency capes, PR capes, whatever it is, and say, hey, we're a digital agency, it's based on data, but do we gel well together? That's one of the things I really liked about our current partner is the way that they briefed, but also just their philosophy, but also they want to do things. Every agency says we want to break shit, blow it up, blah, blah, blah. I think that they were able to show that they do have more of that side because as a culture, at least internally, we're not trying to be safe. We're not trying to be the everyman archetype. We don't want to be McDonald's. We want to go in a different way. But then also like, how do you guys get along? You have drinks. I mean, it is a lot of these human things that you will not get in an RFP.
Yeah. You want to do business with people you actually want to go get a drink with. I don't think you get to do good work if you don't, which I think is a part that is severely lacking, the rapport building, not just in RFPs in general between agencies and clients. Like they forget that part, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's not commoditization, but there's a lot of agencies. Sometimes it feels that way.
90,000 plus in the US alone.
That's not that many.
No. Yeah, you can beat all this.
Yeah, every single one of them. But to your point, you start to build a rapport and then, you have friends in the industry or folks around and, hey, I love them, I hated them or whichever. It does come down to that kind of relationship building.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's, I hate to plug myself again, but the tagline I use is finding an agency is easy, finding the right agency is hard. And if I had to be super honest, it's really fucking hard, truthfully, because there are 90,000 agencies in the US alone. We also love a perfect segue here. I've seen a big shift in, particularly since COVID, but a little bit before, because I was at a boutique agency, of bigger named brands moving towards smaller, specialized, more nimble shops. Call it, as low as like 10 or 15 headcount to like 100 or 200, something like that, moving away from holding company agencies. What do you think of that? Have you seen that shift in your world as well? And do you think smaller shops can handle kind of the scale of a Krystal?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I've seen the same thing. Some of it depends on the concept. I mean, if you're like a Yum Brands or something that's bringing $1 zillion to market, that's still the one thing with the boutique guys, not having like Trade Desk and some of the other stuff. That's hard on the media side, I think. If they can, it's one of those things I think strategically they need to decide, hey, we're independent, we're going to stay independent. That limits, what we're going to be able to do as far as media buying, planning, even stuff of just like having access to upfronts and digital upfronts and that stuff. It's nice to go to upfronts with Omnicom or Starcom or one of these guys and have all of this information and all of this inventory that I don't know if the smaller guys are going to get access to, just to be very blunt about it. The creative side, I think, is a bit different because I think a lot of brands, the bigger brands especially, they want to have more personalized expertise, right? They want to have that relationship and, this agency will jump through hoops for me, and food and bev is crazy. Like stuff changes all the time. It's based on human behavior and traffic and everything else. And, with a blizzard hits in Iowa and you're like, oh my God, I have to make sure all my team members are okay and the restaurants are all right. And then the day after, get everybody to come back, so like that's an immediate plan, crisis, all of this stuff. So having, if you're in with this massive group with an account director or maybe even a VP that's looking after you, are you going to get that type of service that a smaller boutique independent, is very, very happy to have your business and will jump through hoops for you? I think that's the advantage. The downside, like we already talked about, is the scale. I just don't think you're going to get, unfortunately. And media is that game. That said, there are some great smaller shops that do, especially for what we need for performance marketing, sales and traffic, that kind of stuff. Are they going to get economies of scale with Google? I think it's probably better to have the expertise with below the line performance marketing. So a lot of it just depends.
Yeah, I hear you kind of alluded to it. I hear when I ask folks in your role, typically like the most important thing to them, if they have to pick one, it's usually like nimbleness, which again is, I would say sometimes a possibility, sometimes not when you lump scale into it and stuff like that. But yeah, I typically hear from folks who've worked with bigger agencies is like, I can no longer wait 3 weeks to have, creative updated, whereas a small agency we work with is going to do it the same day and, come babysit our kids if we ask them to,
right?
If they're being honest. So I think that just speed to everything, truthfully, and getting out of the big corporate machine is the biggest value of working with a smaller agency.
Oh, 100% agree. And especially if you're asking your internal team and yourself to do that, right? Like you're making these demands of myself. And it's again, I feel like I'm like just this book of Proverbs or something right now. But if you look, it's something I learned in the Army, as a lieutenant. Like if you've never dug a foxhole, then they'll go tell somebody to dig one. If you're not willing to go out there and pick up a goddamn shovel, then you're not a leader. You're a manager, right? You're somebody that's just telling people what to do.
Sure.
And you're not in it with them. You can't be there all the time. Right? It's not something like you do have to delegate and say, I need you to get this done. But agency partners, there's really no difference with your team. Right? Like if we are scrambling and doing things, an agency partner says, you know what, that's not in our scope, that we don't have time for that, you're out. And on our side, I would say that the delivery or the philosophy we need to have is to not put them in that situation.
I'm glad you said that.
You can't be I have been a terrible client, right? Like I've been forced to be a terrible client. Patty especially could tell you stories about some of the stuff with 3G. But, the agencies knew what they were getting into with that relationship. Like we were driving costs down. That's what we needed, right? We needed them to be nimble and all these other things. And I don't mean bad client in a disparaging way towards BK or anybody else. We were just a demanding, tough client. But
Yeah.
agencies knew that when they took our business, right? And if they didn't like that culture, then don't work with us. So at the same time, we're data driven. We try to drive the business and do a lot of those things too. We need to not put an agency partner in the same type of situation where, the day before national media goes, say, change it. We don't like it anymore. I mean, that's the stuff that's you just can't do to people on your team, and you really shouldn't do to a partner either.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's interesting. I can think of in my former agency, one particular client that I had that, you skate the line of wanting to keep the business, but also defending your scope and your team truthfully. And I was on that front line and having conversations where, I would say 10 times a week we would love to do all of these things, but like, we've never discussed these things. Like I can't just say yes to everything, although I'd love to. Like, I'm also compensated by commission. Like, I'd love to say yes to everything. We have to talk about that. And I can remember it got to a point where I think they told the founder of our agency, if Danny brings up scope again, like, we're going to leave or something like that. And I said, I don't know what you want me to do in those scenarios. Like, I can lie and just say yes. So there's definitely some middle ground, I would say. But I have also been in that role for national media, finishing something on a crazy deadline and being told this needs to be updated. I was sitting at a coffee shop in West Midtown that is no longer there. And I believe the exact words from the head of marketing from a very well-known brand was fucking figure it out, and hung up. And I was like, I don't know what to do. And it was video and editing, and it was a wild thing. I just remember sitting there like, and the best part of this entire story, which I rarely tell, is we finished. I can remember it was due at noon, and I literally pressed send at like 11:59 in multiple seconds. Never heard from them.
Seriously?
Yeah. Still,
See that?
It's like a decade ago. Never heard. Literally didn't hear. They ran with it. It, did what they needed it to do, and never heard. But I would truthfully, those types of situations that made me better at what I do now, better at just everything, I would say. But yeah, I wouldn't wish that upon folks early on in their career.
That's the thing. I mean, it's one thing if you're asking for crazy changes at the last minute, but why? There had to have been something to happen. I think if you can loop in your partners a little bit better of, like we just talked about, like, hey, there's a snowstorm in Iowa. Like, we're talking about come, cool off with this awesome hot treat or whatever. Like, we can't run this. Like, I'm sorry, but we have to change it,
Sure.
There isn't a lot of context, I think, that comes with those. But again, I mean, if people are stressed, I get that. But I've just been part of conversations, just like you were given the story, where somebody just subjectively didn't like the plan, right? Somebody at the top who was like, no, change it. Like, change it just to change it, or change it because you really don't think this is going to work,
No, it's tough on both sides. To that point, can you think of whether at Krystal or in any of your other roles, what's been a really wonderful, positive agency experience and what made it so great?
Yeah, it's funny you brought up scope. I mean, I had an agency partner in Tampa when I was running a brand down there, and we'd have drinks at the end of the year to kind of like talk about scope for the next year, because they were more of a long-term partner, and we love them. But he was like, hey man, we did all this stuff that was out of scope. And I'm like, you have to tell me, I mean, I'm not trying to push you into the ground with all these additional requests and stuff, but even things of, hey, we agreed to like 3 edits or 3 versions or whatever it is, and we got to 5, like, hey, you did me a solid, appreciate that. But if it gets ridiculous, then it's, all right, we need to cut from somewhere if it's a material need, right? And so he was always, exactly like you were saying, towing that line of, we want to keep them as a client, but I can't just keep allocating resources and going hundreds of thousands of dollars over scope, just with hours. But I would say that they were a great partner because they were very flexible. They weren't precious with things either. I think that that's a big thing now with agencies, is that we're trying to figure out best returns, and talk with other friends in the industry as well, of like, we're not just going to turn over a budget and say, here's $1 zillion and then more in production and say, go nuts. Right? I think if you're at like Estee Lauder or at Diageo or something, I've heard the stories. I met a friend that runs an agency, and she gets these massive production budgets, and they just want turnkey, right? We are trying to look for more return, and it's to the order of, a quarter of the cost, because you can get scrappy and all of that. So I'd say the agency partners that I've had in the past that had more of that mindset, but we're also just very upfront honest of like, hey, rights cost this much, union rate card is this much. You're like, they would just tell you reality instead of, we're just going to need $1 million. And you're like, okay, So long story short, on the agency front, I also had a really great media agency out of Chicago years ago, and we just got along really well. We just had the same mindset. And again, a lot of it for me just goes down to what is your relationship like? What is your rapport like? Because they're going to do the work, right? Like, you're going to get a good plan. You'll get whichever. But did you actually enjoy it? So really, the treasure was the friends you made along the way, Danny.
I set you up for it, but I think this is the 18th or 19th episode, and it's 19-0, undefeated. When I asked that question, no one ever really mentions the work, truthfully, which is my unpopular opinion that the work doesn't matter. And what I mean by that is, of course, the work matters, but that's the cost of admission. Like, you're going to get fired if you don't do the good work, but you don't get to do any work if you don't get hired, and if you're likable and stuff like that. And I think so many agencies forget that part, truthfully. Like, they're really good at what they do. You can be the best at what you do, but if you're not a pleasure to work with or make your life easier in this scenario and stuff like that, those are, in my opinion, equally, if not more important on the front end of getting in there. Something like a Krystal and being a lifetime partner is worth, infinity, truthfully.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, it's like when you go out and try to look for us, our world, food stylist and a photographer, right? And we're going to change the way that we shoot food. Photographers, sure, they've got a few different styles they can do, but, they generally have a style, right? And you look through their work, and you're like, I really like how he or she or they shoot this. And the same with the food stylist. Like, they've got experience with these different formats. Like a fine dining person coming and doing QSR. Agency work, they'll show you a bunch of different, clients, all the work that they've done. But they should be able to take the brand standards, style guides, all of that from the client, from the brand, and then have the creative horsepower or whatever to turn it into what we want it to be. So to your point, I think it's a little bit more ubiquitous, right? Of like, you got to be able to do the work. You got to be able to match my creative style, what I'm looking for. A stylist or a photographer, yes, but also we're looking for very specific things. I felt like in my career, looking back, there are folks that we've chosen because of the way that their style we like. Agencies are just different.
The work's also super subjective. Like you just mentioned, they need to match your style, and your style's different than, the next 10 CMOs at other brands and stuff like that. So I think it's important too. Like, knowing your audience is such a crucial thing in general. Like, that's why when I'm evaluating agencies or I hear brands talking and they ask for like a portfolio, I'm like, they're going to show you stuff that a bunch of clients liked. Like, if you don't like it, I would argue that's not necessarily the bar for not hiring them. Like, I'd want to know how they arrived at that. If you don't like how something looks, I'd want to know their thinking, their process, how they worked with the client, because I can almost guarantee it's not in the portfolio if that client wasn't happy, or it's not being showcased on the website if they weren't happy with what they were doing. Is that, you kind of alluded to it, is that, if you had to put one thing on it of how to get the best out of your agency partners, is it just an astronomical amount of radical transparency and communication, especially at the scale of a Krystal?
Yeah, I think that really helps. If they're in the dark and we're unhappy, I think most people, just in general, customer service, everything else, they don't make a huge fuss. Like, they don't go full Karen on Instagram. They just don't renew. They don't come back. Right, so it's just sort of, the relationship just kind of slowly dies, because you'll say, hey, we need this, and then they don't, agency partner doesn't understand the full scope of what's going on or the context or anything else, and you get unhappy, they get frustrated because they know you're unhappy, and eventually there's an RFP, and then you guys just part ways, right? So I think that having more transparency definitely helps. At the same time, I feel like with a partner, when you know. It's like breaking up with a significant other, boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever. You're like, yeah, it's just not working anymore, right? And there's no amount of radical transparency that's going to change that, unfortunately. Because again, to what you've always said, it does come down to human relationships and just, vibes, man.
You have to have immaculate vibes, as they say. I'm going to ask the second part of this first question because you just mentioned it. I'm going to ask about a negative agency experience in a second. But to your point, like once you know. Once something has reached, a negative point, or the seed of doubt has been, planted, do you think a bad or negative experience can be salvaged and gotten back on the rails, or not really?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what it is, right? But yes, I think that if there is kind of a come to Jesus moment, or whatever you want to call it, of, hey, this is not happening. We need this. And you see how the partner responds. I think that kind of, but it goes to the agency side as well. Of like, this is not working for us because of this, so let's just be honest about it and say, like, if you guys, maybe we're not the right partner. But it's like when somebody resigns because they get a new job, right? And they come back and they expect a counteroffer. It's never going to be the same.
Sure.
Right? I mean, even if there's a counteroffer is given, oh, well, I'm so happy. There's always in the back of your mind,
sure,
like that whole thing happened. You tried to leave me. That was a big thing. The 4 connections. I think it's Driven. The book's Driven, and it's about like the 4 things that are just innate in humans, from 250,000 years ago. And one of them is the drive to belong. And that, for some people, is the main drive. It was like the drive to belong, the drive to acquire, the drive to defend what you've acquired, and then the drive to learn and grow. And so the whole premise is, give my Columbia program a hook, is that you should be hitting those 4 things whenever you're doing anything: marketing, advertising, relationships. And that drive to belong is extremely powerful. And so I think that people are absolutely devastated. And there's data that shows when layoffs happen, people rank that on par, if not worse, than getting divorced. Right? It's just like your family is gone, like your work family, whatever it is, even though that's not the way capitalism works and yada, yada. We're not a family. You're more of like a baseball team. But at the same time,
everyone's replaceable and tradable.
Unfortunately, and I hate that. I really do, but that's not the setup that we have. But that, I think, with agency partners and with your team, understanding those drives, like if they don't feel like they belong, right? If they know that something is wrong in the relationship, it's extremely demotivating and unfulfilling, just as much as, learning and acquiring more knowledge and growing as a person. If they're not getting that, see ya. And I think that works not only for internal employees, but agency partners too.
As with most marketers, I presume you've had a negative agency experience in the past. Can you talk about one in particular or a couple, and like what made them so negative, or what ultimately led you to, think this isn't working anymore?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you more of like a nebulous answer because I think everybody's had some stuff that's gone through.
Boo! Talk some shit, Casey.
This
is the controversial podcast. No, you can give a nebulous answer. Yeah,
no,
we're breaking shit here.
Look, I mean, just because they weren't right for me and for my brand doesn't mean they're not a good shop.
I agree.
Right? So like, I'm not going to pigeon and fly in and shit all over everything and fly away. But at the same time, there are some things, I can give a specific example from, a couple of brands ago, because I tend to jump around a lot. That's not a great thing. But I learned a lot. That's good.
You just like to travel.
I like to travel, exactly. Especially back to New York. But there just was not a trust that, it was on the media side, that they were really doing anything innovative, right? I'll give a very specific example. So I'll talk about Alex again, as a good buddy of mine from another brand. He and I were running media together, and we banned banner ads. I tend to ban banner ads, static banner ads, wherever I go. And I will give that as like a very specific thing.
Why do you ban those?
If I hear you say efficient CPM, I'm going to jump out the fucking window, right?
Okay.
But it's more about like, it's just a layup, right? You're like, oh, digital billboard. And it's a great efficient CPM, and it'll be everywhere. And
they're allowed to do it, they just can't bring it up.
No, they're not allowed to do it. I mean, it's one of those things where, look, we can get into billboard, or we can get into digital strategy and all that.
There are going to be so many agencies who slide in your DMs now who are like, we would never in a million years recommend that.
I'm not that cool. But no, we have this philosophy of, we're a smaller kind of legacy brand that needed to break through and all of that. And I'm of the opinion, looking at data and some other things, that banner ads, specifically static banner ads, like the old school ones are on the side and the header, and nobody sees them. People ignore them. There's a stat that just came out on linear television that only 5% of brand messages people actually listen to and see, and the majority of those are on sports. Right? So like, we're doing all of this work, and marketers talking to marketers, and the logo needs to be bigger and this needs to be over here, and nobody even sees it. They just ignore them. So it was more of don't have that mindset of, I just need efficient CPMs here because I'm being graded on ROAS. Okay, yeah, ROAS is important, but you need to actually have people engage with the media, engage with the buy. And we just never, You know, it's one of those things that just, we never got to terms with that. And they're great. They're a great shop. Love those guys. But that was just one of those things of like, we got to go with somebody that's not every damn time going to throw me static banner ads. I mean, Alex even said, like, do takeovers, do something different, do something that's going to catch my attention, not a billboard on the side of the road when I'm doing 90 miles an hour, which I think billboards even actually more effective.
No, I like that. And I also appreciate you saying just because they weren't the right agency for you doesn't mean they're not a solid shop. It's interesting, like with the rise of communities online from COVID and stuff, I see often, it happened literally last week, an agency that I don't have a relationship with, but I've heard of and hear they do good work. And somebody asked if folks had heard of them, and like a group of people shit all over them for something like, seemed like very personal things, you know, like nothing to do with the work. And like, I'm like, man, nobody would ever hire this agency now from this group. And like, there's some pretty important people. Like this is, I feel bad for them and stuff, but yeah, I mean, that's why I take it with a grain of salt. Like when I'm looking for new agency partners and somebody says, even you, if you were like, oh, this agency sucks, like don't work with them, I would still have a conversation with them. I'd probably ask you like, why, let's dive into that a little more and stuff. There are certain things that would presumably, like if you were like, oh, they would ghost me, like they wouldn't reply for a week. Like there are certain things that I think are unforgivable, but yeah, that's the whole thing with 90,000 agencies. Like, there's just inherently not going to be a million agencies who are the right fit for you. So,
some of it too, man, like working directly with creatives, you know, not having that client services layer is difficult. Like, I understand that that's better for our spend because we're cutting out kind of a middleman, but it is hard to talk to a creative director on the client side and say, we don't like this.
Yeah.
You know, change this because, you know, they tend to, some tend to kind of marry their designs, marry their creative. And it is a whole skill set within client services to take what the brand or the client wants and translate it into, you know, positive feedback on something. It's not easy.
No, I agree. What's something overall that you think agencies either get wrong, or what's something that you wish more of them kind of got, quote unquote, or understood? Or what could you, if you could say something to all agencies, what would that be?
Yeah, I think this obsession with a 15 and a 30 being the, you know, the kind of tent pole for a campaign. I think a lot of people go immediately to a video of some kind, right? Whereas that may not be right. It's not always going to be that, hey, we're going to do a 15-second TV spot, and then everything will just cascade down from there. I know there are agencies that don't do that, but I think that every agency needs to be looking holistically at guest experience, customer experience, period. How are people interacting with the brand? And not just, oh, this would be so cool if we did a video this way, right? And then we'll just make all the assets from there. Very specific example, you know, we talk about data and being data driven. And again, taking this back to the very beginning thing with machine learning AI and having this data set in front of you, that's not a replacement for getting out behind your desk and going and ordering a Krystal, ordering a side chick. How did it go? What was it like? How did it feel? What were the smells, sights? You know, was the person nice to you? Did he call you an asshole? Like whatever, right? Just experiencing the brand. You know, people say like, in the wild, natively. That to me is, if agency partners are not doing that, if they're just as guilty as we are as marketers of just hiding behind a desk and looking at transaction data, right? Or, you know, Data Central's brand funnel. Like you have to go out and act. I'll give a very specific example. There's a lot of data here at Krystal that showed that, you know, our target was 25 to 54, you know, white males and females living in the suburbs, blah, blah. And then you actually went into a Krystal and that, we never talked to the Black community, perfect example. And then we found some other data that actually showed we way over-indexed with the Black community. We just don't engage with them, right? Another example was this Hispanic community not really coming to us. Well, we don't offer anything. We don't talk to them, right? So like you could look at data and then go look at your experience. And if you're not doing that, then you're lost.
No, that's awesome feedback. I think your answer is going to be AI, but I'll ask anyways. What are you most bullish on in the marketing space? We've got, I don't know if the NFT bubble has burst yet. We've got metaverses. We've got AI. We've got events back. What are you most excited about from either a personal standpoint or the brand standpoint?
Yeah, I think a lot of the experiential stuff, that was what was growing before and will continue to grow. I mean, I think experience is the currency of Gen Z and younger millennials especially. I mean, it's always been, but the get off my lawn folks look at social media. And, when we were younger, I remember my first phone was a flip phone, right? 2000. You couldn't carry around your entire friend group, right? Now you can with social media, and you can tell them exactly what's going on. So a lot of it is unhealthy obsession, right? With Instagram, these other things, and one-upsmanship. But it's also like telling everybody, hey man, I just went to this cool bar, or I just had this cool experience. I just climbed the mountain. So that to me is going to continue that'll continue to proliferate. But it's not so much based on, it seems like with younger generations, the focus isn't as much on the boomer drive of acquiring as much as possible, living in the suburbs, having a great life, and then retiring to Florida. These younger generations seem to be, and maybe there are other generations throughout time that have had this. I imagine probably the World War I generation with Dadaism that was completely nihilistic after having a horrendous war and saying, you know what, I want to go live my life. And then you got the F. Scott Fitzgeralds of the world that went and did that, But this generation seems to have a lot more in common with them. There's a lot of really funny things with pandemics and wars and all this stuff, and saying, hey, carpe diem, right? I think that brands really need to be much more focused on experience and making experience really good, because I did see another nerdy stat that word of mouth is by and large number one for how to get a message out. It was something like 5% of conversations happen on social media because people talk to each other. There's text, there's all this other stuff. We tend to think that all these conversations are only happening online, only happening on social, when the vast majority are still people to people. So that's a big thing. It's kind of back to the future of, don't forget the basic drives of a human being is that they want to be in a community with other people. So I'm most bullish really on this younger generation that is much more into it's like the anti-1980s, right? This Wall Street mentality, the movie, not the group of people. They're anti that, they seem to be. And so if you can tap into them and be culturally relevant and understand what they like, they will absolutely pick up a banner for you. But it's hard.
I agree. What is something that keeps you up at night from a marketing standpoint?
Not driving traffic and sales and going bankrupt, turning into Kmart. Seriously, it is one of those things of how can we stay alive? Because I think as a marketer, you tend to be looked at as a quarterback, right? On a team. And if you win, then it was the team, right? If you lose, it's that bum Tom Brady,
I saw him last night. Not a good look for Tom Brady.
No.
He also slide tackled a guy I saw this morning.
But at the same time, was Tom Brady on playing safety when, they scored 31 points on the Bucs? No. Or whatever it was. Yeah. So what keeps me up at night, honestly, is that of turning into the fate of a Sears or, a Kmart. My grandfather started at JCPenney in 1921 when they were based in New York, right? They had their offices in New York City. They ended up moving to Dallas after he retired, but he retired in 1970. He stayed at one company his whole life and was able to, he ended up running real estate for the entire company as an EVP. He started as a secretary, So those guys, it was a must. I don't think that the world is that much different, because he was dealing with the rise of the suburbs, right? People moving out of the cities, putting pennies into, malls. That was totally new. Nobody knew anything about how to do that, right? And trying to stay relevant as a brand and say, wow, the old model of going downtown is kind of starting to shift to going into the suburbs. And so I take a lot of comfort in his experience. No, that it's never easy no matter what time period, but that's what keeps me up at night, is just not learning something new and staying on top of what the future, trying to predict the future in a way, and not putting a brand in a place where it's irreparable damage where you just can't come back from it.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I've seen in food in general, my first job after college was in an office park off Sugarloaf Parkway in Duluth, Georgia. Nice. We would plan lunch. Everybody in the office, either the day before or in the morning, would be hey, we're going to do this for lunch. You had your group and you did it. The thing I've seen with food brands, of having worked with them a little bit, not at your level, and I'm sure you look at it from a different lens, is there's just so many options now. So to your point about relevancy, you could be the most relevant brand in the world, but there's timeliness that comes into it. There's location, there's just so many factors that go into it. Again, at the end of the day, you're just competing for attention. So I hope you get some sleep. It's just I imagine a nerve-wracking thing just to think like you have, I don't know, a split second when somebody gets hungry and starts thinking about food to be even in the conversation when there's a million different brands out there. So I don't blame you for losing sleep over that.
Yeah, I mean, aside from like the usual family stuff and children and keeping your family alive, blah, blah, blah.
Those are good things, yeah.
Yeah, those are definitely worries. But no, you're 100% right. I mean, there's just a lot of competition, and there are concepts that we don't even know about, right, that are coming, and they're going to kick your ass. Chipotle kind of came out of nowhere. And it seems obvious now. Wow, that was a really cool concept. But then there's other ones, not to like hate on my Moe's friends, but pretty similar.
Sure.
They're not anywhere near $1 billion.
Right. No, that's fair. That was my final marketing question. We'll rapid fire a couple and wrap up here. What was your very first job?
Very first job was the Army. And so I grew up on military family. We didn't get paid for anything. We weren't allowed to go have jobs because my parents were like, you will do sports and you will go to school, which was a good trade, right? But then it also meant that we had to do like farm labor in Northern Virginia, for free. So my first actual job was a lieutenant in the Army.
Thank you for your service. And I presume you have a good answer to this. Like normally the follow-up is, what have you taken from that experience into what you do now? And do you think it's made you a better marketer?
Yeah, I think a lot of humility, honestly. I mean, they beat into our heads at West Point that don't come out and be there. It's called a ring knocker. We invented class rings in the 1820s or something. And a ring knocker is somebody that would, do this and knock their ring. And then you knew, hey, they're a West Pointer. There's a whole group of them. You have to do what they say. Your opinion does not matter because you're not in the club. And that is very much the detriment of a lot of other really good leaders and officers in the Army. And so having that same mindset of you don't know everything just because you have this ring in your hand. There were sergeants in the Army. It's a stupid, thing that they say of, I have boots that have been in the Army longer than you have. And it is true. At the same time, you're in charge. You're the legal commander, but you don't know anything. Like these guys are professionals. And so taking that on, especially like being a younger person and leading teams that were mixed and maybe had older people, had a lot of experience, having that same mindset of being open. I don't know everything. I'm going to make the decision because I have to. Like I'm the leader here. But a great example very quickly is that, if you're a platoon leader, you got 4 squad leaders, list the guys and a platoon sergeant, right? You're in charge of them. They have a hell of a lot of experience. They're very professional. You come back, you get orders, you're like, all right, boys or ladies now, which is awesome. This is the mission, this is what we have to do. What are your thoughts? Right? And it is one of those, like, everybody takes a knee and, well, sir, I think we should do it this way, da-da-da-da-da. You get this kind of consensus in a way, but also they all know the mission. They all know exactly what they're supposed to do. So if you get killed or incapacitated or whatever, any one of them can pick up the banner and keep moving, right? That's very different than other centralized armies like Soviet army or whoever. Kill a general, nobody knows what to do, right? They haven't pushed that kind of commander's intent all the way down. And so that is a big thing that's always really stuck with me. And I didn't do really much in the Army. My classmates and friends did some pretty incredible things. But having that core nugget of leadership, of transparency, tell everybody what's going on to a degree, right? But more importantly, empower them that if stuff changes on the ground, right? They know what the intent is, what the big goal is, and then they can move and change. So they always say, like, tell the soldier what to do, not how to do it. It's pretty similar with people on your team. This is what I need you to get done. I will guide you on how to do it, but I trust you. I know you'll figure it out.
Good answer. You cannot answer Krystal, or you can answer Krystal this next question. What would your final meal be?
Final meal? Oh, man.
Krystal can be 1A. I need 1B.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I was going to say, obviously, Krystal. I'm a big chicken cordon bleu guy, but it's got to be like a really good one. That or a beef Wellington. I've got like a gluten unfortunate thing. I won't kill me, but I won't have a good day. But still,
that's fair.
Chicken cordon bleu when it's done really well. And I also have like a really terrible sweet tooth. So I would say like just a badass chocolate chip cookie. If I'm going to leave this earth,
I take the same opinion on. I have a terrible sweet tooth as well. After every meal, I have to have something, but I'm very anti-fancy dessert. So when I go to fancy restaurants, I either want a scoop of ice cream or like a chocolate chip cookie, and like no one ever. They're like, oh, we have this like double chocolate ganache. I'm like, nah, I just want something simple. Nobody does it. That's my contribution to fine dining. They need to have like a candy bar menu. I'm being serious.
Yeah.
Would love if they would just walk out with a Snickers after.
You should have a candy lineup like George. That's right.
Costanza, I'll eat it with a fork and knife. That's what I'm saying. And then my final question for you, who is somebody who inspires you personally or professionally or both?
Oh, man. I think I already talked about Patty. She's awesome. Ryan Sinclair was a boss of mine at Outback, who was awesome. I've had a lot. Joe Blundell was a boss of mine when I was at Le Pain Quotidien. She's now a bigwig at Papa John's. So I've been pretty blessed to have some great folks. My chief at ABI, Paniza, and Bruno was my boss, so they were awesome. But I look back, I mean, I'm a history person, right? He doesn't get enough credit, but U.S. Grant, that guy was a hell of a person, like hell of a dude. The stuff that he did, basically saving the country, destroying a bunch of traitors in this country. And they were traitors. They fought the U.S. Army. But also after, when he was president, he bucked a lot of trends. The guy destroyed the Ku Klux Klan. Unfortunately, came back, set up Department of Justice, really championed freedmen's rights and tried to actually help Black America. But just in general, I mean, he was somebody that came kind of out of nothing, was a bit of a failure. He had a really bad drinking problem in the Army when he was younger. Didn't really do well as a civilian, and was the right guy at the right time to come back into the Army and win that damn war. And so for me, I look back at, he's just not for the same ways. The guy just took a punch and would just get back up and eventually, won. He made a lot of mistakes, but he did a lot of amazing things, and we wouldn't be the country we are without him.
That's basically marketing. You try a bunch of shit and get knocked down, and then you get back up, hopefully.
Right. I mean, there was this great thing. I know that we're a little bit over time, but it was at, I think it.
Casey, I run the podcast and sponsor. We could talk as long as you want.
You do whatever you want.
Yeah.
I think it was at Shiloh, and they got waxed the first day. Right. They got taken by surprise, and Sherman came up to him at the end of the day, and he said, "Well, Grant, we fought the devil's own day." And Grant kind of looked at him and said, "Yep, look them tomorrow, though," and they did. So that's just the mentality I think you have to have. You learn, you get your ass handed to you, you learn, you get better,
No, that's great advice. I give it like roughly a week before you get a cold message from an agency or two talking about how big of a history and war buff they are. So you can thank this podcast for that. I can almost guarantee it. I'm being serious.
It's funny, man. When you come over, we have, I think I've told you this, but we've got, I've got my parents are Vietnam vets, and we got a painting over the mantle that they bought. It's Joshua Chamberlain, who was from Maine, Civil War general. He was the guy in Gettysburg that brought the swinging gate that kind of knocked out the Confederate flank and really saved the army at Gettysburg. But this painting is of him on his horse, and the guy went through literally everything. He went through every major battle. It's insane. And they're doing the kind of the victory parade through DC, and the painting is this woman running out with a wreath to give his horse, and the horse flips out. So the painting is the horse kind of rearing back. And Chamberlain and his horse were famous for always having stoically, stayed in there. And my parents loved it because it spoke to them as veterans of combat veterans of, this is PTSD, right? Like this horse had it, he had it, something non-threatening. Somebody running out with a flower, you don't see them, and it was a terrible experience, but it just shows the horrors of it. And so we have that kind of sets the tone of, I went to West Point, but let's not forget how terrible this experience could be, And then next to it is a picture of Grant at Shiloh. And so living in Atlanta, that is very much a clear signal that I am not a lost cause person. And if you talk about the Confederacy, you can get out of my house.
That's great. We love to hear it. That's a fitting end to this podcast. I appreciate you joining, giving us a full hour, and look forward to hearing more from Krystal this year and what's next for him.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Sarah. Appreciate it.
We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for checking out this episode of You Should Talk To. This show is brought to you by the company with the same name, You Should Talk To, a company that helps marketing leaders find the right agency or freelancer for their situation. If you enjoyed what you learned in this episode, make sure to follow You Should Talk To wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, or visit YouShouldTalkTo.com for more information.